This is Kent Mulgeta now with Jim Check, and we have Kevin Falcon, leader of the BC United Party, with us today. So nice of you to join us. How are things?
Things are good, guys. Thanks for having me back.
So we wanted to start off by you've released some platform materials for people to sink their teeth into. What's the highlight that people should be looking for there?
Some basic but very important information. Essentially, we're saying end the tax grabs. This is an NDP government that's introduced or increased 32 new taxes since they've come into office. That, frankly, the cumulative impact has been devastating for almost everyone. We're now the most unaffordable province in the entire country. Second thing is balancing budgets. That still matters. We made a commitment to balance it within our first term. That just means being disciplined with taxpayer dollars, which we always have been while in government. We will again. And the third is just creating certainty around permit approvals. We cannot have the permit paralysis we've got going on in this province right now. And the only way you change that is by doing what I first did when I was elected in 2001, my first job: eliminate red tape. I reduced it by over 42% in our first 3 years. We need to get back to focusing on red tape and bureaucracy.
I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We had another news release that came out of Merritt there. They closed the Planers mill, Aspen Planers. It seems like BC was built on the backs of forestry if we look back throughout history. And now it seems like BC, or the BC government, has turned its back on forestry. Again, BC government is saying, the forest minister is saying, we're putting up the story I think at 11:30, saying that it's just interest rates and a slow economy, but the company is saying it's regulations and stumpage and all that stuff, access to fiber, similar to what Canfor said when they closed the mill in Bear Lake, halted their future build in Houston, and shut down a shift in. It seems like if they say they're saying they're meeting once a month, are they at the same meeting? That's my question.
Yeah, no, look, I think it's quite rare and extraordinary, to be honest with you, to have voices in the forestry sector in particular that are so reliant on government policy and regulatory regime to have the courage to come up and speak truth about what they're dealing with. I always hear this privately, for sure, from the unions, from the workers, from the companies themselves, that it's just this government's inability to actually make decisions and create certainty for the sector that has resulted in a lot of these decisions being made. And the government may try and point to, it's the interest rates and, it's the marketplace, et cetera. It's simply not true. It is directly related to government policies. There's no doubt about it. And what is needed is a government and leadership that recognizes, yes, there has to be changes in the forestry sector. Nobody believes that there doesn't need to be some changes made, but we can provide those changes and work with the sector while at the same time providing certainty. Certainty means a company like ones that we've heard about on Vancouver Island, for example, shouldn't be waiting over 800 days for a permit to be issued. That is ridiculous. But this is not uncommon in British Columbia under the NDP.
What would a BC United government do to make this province more hospitable to the forest sector?
Well, it's not just the forest sector, I have to tell you. It's the entire natural resource sector and indeed the business sector. One of the big concerns I have right now is that we have seen a turnaround. When the NDP got elected, there were 10 private sector jobs being created for every public sector job. Okay, that was in 2017. Today, after almost 8 years of the NDP government, we've got 5.5 public sector jobs being created for every private sector job. I can tell you that is not a trajectory that we can stay on. And the only way you change that is by giving the business community, the investment community, the community that invests capital into BC and makes those decisions, whether in oil and gas, whether in natural resources, whether in the tech space, they've got to have the confidence of knowing that if they make a decision to invest capital in British Columbia, they have some reasonable certainty that permits will be approved and that they will be able to, get into doing what they need to do within a timely way. And right now, they don't have any sense of confidence around that at all.
Yeah, the VP of Aspen Planers, he did not mince words. He said, simply put, the whole forest industry in BC, not an exaggeration, it's collapsing and is just in a terrible state. And you can see the negative consequences all over the province. And thousands of jobs have been lost. And we did another story and it says that BC is the most expensive place to conduct forest operations.
It is. We're the highest cost jurisdiction in North America. We've got a government that has not only added more costs to the business community, and I get it. A lot of people will be, well, too bad, they can handle that. But the problem is you become the most high cost district in North America, which we are here in British Columbia. At the same time that you've got lack of certainty because you've got permit paralysis out there, you've got a government that's afraid to make decisions. They're creating even more uncertainty on the land base with their proposed Land Act changes that would effectively provide a veto to First Nations, which created even more uncertainty out there. All of this conspires together to damage the interests of communities, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and certainly the natural resource sector writ large.
The NDP supposedly built its base off of the union worker. The sawmills and the forestry industry is heavily unionized. It seems like they've turned their back on those people. What's your message to the forest industry workers?
Well, my message to the Steelworkers Union in particular, but frankly, all the unionized and even non-unionized workers out there, that the best thing that you can have, put the politics aside for a minute, the best thing that they need is a government that understands that our natural resources are not a bad thing, that we ought to be proud of the fact that we live in a province that is blessed with an abundance of natural resources, whether it's in the mining space, the oil and gas space, or the forestry sector. But we have to have a government that encourages a climate that is going to attract capital so that companies are investing in their workers, their mills, and their operations so that we've got a viable future ahead. My God, the forestry sector is a renewable resource. Trees grow. I mean, this should not be a sector that is a sunset industry, which is what the NDP believe. I believe it's a sunrise industry if we could just get some government that knows how to look after the interests of workers, communities, and the industry itself.
Can we shift to politics a little bit? Because
Sure.
all this becomes a bit of a moot point if your party gets decimated in the election. The polls have not looked good. I don't know if you have access to any new polling that suggests your party's doing better than it had been doing. But what do you say about what's happening with the BC Conservatives and a lot of voters who would otherwise be supporting your party?
You know, I say the same thing I always say, which is give the public some time. We've got 4.5 months to the next election. Nobody is paying attention. In fact, much of the public, we learn on the doorstep, doesn't even know there's going to be an election coming up in October. But they will start to pay attention. And when they do, they're going to discover a couple of things. Number one, they'll discover that the BC Conservative Party is a totally separate party than the federal Conservative Party of Pierre Poilievre. The second thing they're going to discover is that the leader of that party and many of his candidates have views that are, pretty outside the mainstream, if I can be charitable. But frankly, they're intolerable in many parts of the province. So, for example, climate change. We've all experienced it with the forest fires, with the floods. This has been increasing, for decades in British Columbia. We had the massive floods in the Lower Mainland. We've had forest fires every year now for the last almost 5 years in a row. And yet, what does the leader of the BC Conservative Party say? He denies that climate change is even a thing. He says there's no human impact on climate change and that there is no crisis. Well, that may play well in some parts of the province, but I can tell you, in the Lower Mainland, where 55% of the seats come from, that's a non-starter for a whole bunch of people down here. And
if I can just stop
Sure.
you there, we just spoke to John Rustad, and let me just throw at you his sort of points on climate change. He seems to be saying now that he sees that it's happening. But he makes the point that, BC only contributes worldwide, a vanishingly small amount. So global warming will happen regardless of what we do. So therefore, it is going to happen. So let's just turn our focus to being resilient against it, rather than putting in expensive programs to control emissions. So would that be a dividing line, a sharp dividing line for those middle range voters that don't like the sound of that?
Well, so first of all, his position seems to be shifting yet again, and it's hard to keep up. He was just quoted in the Globe and Mail very clearly saying exactly what I just said to you, that he denies that climate change is real, that it's not human caused, and there is no crisis. Okay, so now he's saying, well, we're just a minuscule part of it. But I can tell you, British Columbians do want to be seen to be leaders in helping tackle what is indeed, I agree with him on this point, a global challenge. I've said this many, many times. And actually, part of the solution to that is our natural resources. including LNG. That's why exporting LNG to places like India and China is a huge opportunity for British Columbia, because we can achieve more emissions reduction just by allowing them to move off of coal-fired power into LNG power than we could ever achieve here in British Columbia. So that's a good thing. But there needs to be some consistency in your platform. He continues to move all over the ice, frankly, on his belief system. But at the end of the day, I can tell you this: British Columbians do want to do their part too. We've got technology, we've got a tech industry that can be part of the solution. We've done lots of leadership here in British Columbia, including independent power projects that we started as BC Liberals, even while John Rustad was part of our BC Liberals. So there's lots of good things we can do and we can continue to do. But to deny that it's even an issue, I think it's a non-starter.
When you talk about your platform, we've seen 3 pieces come out: end the tax grabs, balance the budget, and open BC to jobs. When can we start to see the full platform for the BC United Party?
No, thank you. It's a great question, because we've actually been rolling that out. So you certainly saw our mental health and addiction piece of the platform called Better as Possible. You've seen our Safer BC, which is how we're going to end David Eby's catch and release program. We've talked about our conservation policy, which is really important, especially for folks that like to spend time in the wilderness and want to know that we're looking after all the values that we love British Columbia for. And we released, our framework for our economic policy, which is balancing budgets, stopping the tax grabs, reducing taxes, and frankly, issuing permits and creating certainty. You're going to hear more as we go forward. We're going to be talking about healthcare. We're going to be talking some of our other areas. And the reason we're doing it this way is, as we get up to that election campaign itself, we will make sure that British Columbians know exactly where the BC United Party stands. Because at the end of the day, I really do think policy matters. We have to have adults in the room that have actually thought through this stuff.
So I think it's in David Eby's best interest that you and John Rustad kind of squabble between each other instead of attacking the policies of the NDP. When does your focus go on taking on the person in power, as opposed to, I guess some people would say it's like kind of like just noise on the side? Because that the person in power is the one that you kind of focus your attention on.
Oh, absolutely. And that will be the primary focus, certainly for me. Frankly, I don't spend much time thinking about John Rustad or even some of his crazy ideas. Other people can do that. I am entirely focused on making sure that David Eby is held accountable for the results that we're seeing in British Columbia. And honestly, I'm just going to say to people, like, if you like what you're seeing in British Columbia right now, he's definitely your person. Vote for him. But if you don't like the fact that, just a minute, if you don't like the fact that we've got the highest housing and rental costs in North America, if you don't like the fact that we're the most unaffordable province in BC, if you don't like the way our healthcare system and crime is working in this province, then look around. And when you look around, we're going to be that agent of change that is informed by proper policies that have been thought out more than a bumper sticker.
Okay, but before we all decide not to look at what the Conservatives are doing, I had one more question on that. We did see your candidate in Seashelt defect to the Conservatives. Obviously, you didn't like the sound of that.
No, of course not. But you got to understand, that's going to happen sometimes in politics. It just is. And he's not a bad person at all. So I'm not going to, just because a person's no longer with us, I'm not going to badmouth him. I'll just say this, that he's naive in understanding what he did, because his view was the BC Conservatives had sucked him into believing that, the polls. Well, the problem is polls today are historically notoriously inaccurate. We keep getting examples of it, and people profess shock every time. India, Modi was supposed to win by a landslide. The polls all said that until he didn't. And this happened in the Vancouver elections too. Same thing. It happened in 2013 with the NDP. They were supposed to win. Everyone agreed until they didn't. So I just think you have to be pretty careful about polls. And we've got a public that is not paying attention right now. And what little attention they're paying, if they get asked BC United Conservative, they're saying Conservative because they're thinking about Pierre Poilievre. And I understand that. I'm a federal Conservative supporter myself. I just happen to be. But we are a coalition. We've got supporters that are federal Liberal voters, disaffected NDPers, and Conservatives. And that's how you win in British Columbia, whether you're called Social Credit, whether you're called BC Liberal or BC United.
Anything else, Jim?
Yeah, 32 new taxes. That was increased or introduced. Is that a record?
Well,
it's in government.
It's not a good record, but it's a consistent one for the NDP. Absolutely. And look, I think everyone needs to understand just the It's never any one, cut that kills you. It's the thousandth cut that you've been hit with when you wake up and realize I'm bleeding to death. I think right now, especially in the business community, the small business community, that's how they're feeling now. They're literally bleeding to death. They've had so many costs imposed on them that they are finding it impossible to just survive. And I'll tell you, my small business plan isn't about helping them survive. It's helping them thrive. There's a difference. And that means we have to get back to putting money back in the pockets of British Columbians, like we did when we were in government in the past, so that people will spend that money. They always do. They'll put their kids in new sports programs, buy a car, go out for dinners, whatever they do. But the critical thing is we have to stop punishing taxpayers in British Columbia. The NDP will never stop. There's never too much that they can't take out of your pocket because they're socialists. But at the end of the day, we've got to get back to people that respect the taxpayer that earns and works hard to earn their money. And we have to be respectful for what we take away. And frankly, the waste of spending that I see going on right now appalls me. It appalls me.
I just want to say those 100 people in Merritt that lost their jobs again, BC throughout history, a lot of these small towns were built on the backs of forestry. And again, it seems like the government has turned its back on those people.
They've turned their back, and let's be clear, this is not the NDP government of old. The NDP government of old would have been, had representatives from rural BC. They understood the importance of the natural resource sector. This is an urban government driven by an urban premier with an urban radical agenda that doesn't frankly speak to any of the communities beyond hope. And that's unfortunate, because that's why getting people elected that understand the depth and complexity of this province is so important. We have to not only make sure we have a thriving natural resource sector, but that we've also got, a sector in the lower mainland here that is firing on all cylinders. And that will not happen when you have a government that is just fixated with constantly increasing costs for British Columbians, and frankly, getting us to a place where we saw 70,000 more people leaving BC last year than came here. And they're all going to places like Alberta and Ontario and other provinces, because under the NDP, we have become unaffordable BC. That's just the reality. It's not just me saying it. All the evidence and the media reporting have confirmed this. We are the most expensive, most unaffordable province in the country after 7.5 years of NDP government.
Talking about going to Alberta, I know quite a few people that went to Alberta tonight to be in Edmonton for the game tonight, and they just want to be in the parking lot, in the sports arena. Canada needs things to unite them, and I think the Oilers have done a great job, even if it's for a moment, to bring people back together, even though you're Canucks fans. Both of you guys are Canucks fans. Yeah. But I think tonight we hope that the Edmonton Oilers bring some glory back to Canada.
Bring the cup back, right?
Bring the cup back. Yeah. And again, like I said in the beginning, Leon Draisaitl overtime, game winner.
But
I hope you're right. I really do. Oh, well, I'm going to go with the Oilers for sure, because the comeback has been extraordinary. It's been remarkable. And I'd love to see them bring it home. It's been far too long since a Canadian team has hoisted the cup. And I think even though it hurts not to see Vancouver do it, they can do it next year. I'd love to see Edmonton do it this year.
We had an employee text us as soon as they won Game 6 and say, sorry, I have to go to Edmonton with my fiance.
I love it.
Going to the parking lot.
I love it. That's great. That's the kind of excitement you love to see.
There you go. We thank you again for your time. You've always been very gracious with your time with us, so we thank you for your time.
And thank you for the work you do.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you soon. And
right.
Thank you for watching Kelowna Now.